Okay, so today we're going to be looking at Lord of the Flies and how to structure a response to meet the criteria of the assessment objectives set out by the AQA in the GCSE English Literature syllabus. I've got a nice little activity to start with in terms of reflecting on the novel. Think about the three most important events according to you, rank them in order of importance, and then think about what made one event more important than the other, and then go into your explanation about why that is. So take that as a little task to do, and then we'll carry on. Now, in terms of this essay question, we're looking at control, and I've used this essay plan before, but just to talk through it, I've gone for a particular focus on the control in the novel and the relationship of dominance over the rest of the tribe between Ralph and Jack, and exploring that as Jack descends into savagery from around about chapter 4 with painted faces and long hair. And then we see, really, by chapter 10, as we move towards the conclusion of the novel, his complete out-and-out power and how he chases Ralph to the end of the island and ultimately either to death or refuge, which he luckily finds. So with any essay plan, I've got to include a focus on the assessment objectives, and there are 4 assessment objectives for the literature responses to Lord of the Flies. The first one is reference to the text. So I've got clear reference to the text in terms of the blue quotes and the green quotes, and that covers a short portion of the text but also more widely across the novel as a whole. And then what I've got to look at is how I'm going to start to embed within that analysis of language through the quotes a focus on form and structure, and as I start to prepare responses to form and structure, which I've looked at already, then I've got to focus on how I develop my response from a clear analysis of language into a more perceptive and sophisticated response that starts to consider Golding's aim with the text. And then finally, I want to focus on how to start to embed context into my response, and it's similar to structure and form in the way that I start to integrate this into my response. And usually I have a very clear focus at this particular stage on Golding's message and how he develops this message through the Bildungsroman structure, where we follow Ralph from childhood innocence into a savage adult experience. And obviously, in terms of looking at the aim of Golding, I want to focus back on the essay question in terms of that theme of control and how that is a key element that drives the plot forward and thrusts the reader into this knowledge of understanding by the end of the text. Now, when it comes to responding to the text, I want to focus on being very clear and precise with how I'm guiding the examiner to read my response. So I use what's called a PEA iceberg evaluative comment structure, and in this way I'm able to guide my examiner to how I'm responding to AO1 through the use of reference to the text, and then how I'm responding to an analysis of language and subject terminology by focusing on word categories or sentence types, and then also how I'm starting to think about the overall impact of the novel for the contextual reader and also the contemporary audience as well. And in that way I cover all 3 assessment objectives in each of the responses that I write. And then with a new quote, I just focus on the same pattern of structure to response, and in this way I start to really develop a consistent approach to how I'm dealing with the text and how I'm analysing structure, form and language. And it really gives a sense of clarity to the response when you repeatedly focus on analysing the text in this way, and you start to break down a real good, strong understanding of what's actually happening in the text and how it all relates to that larger purpose that Golding was aiming for. And then finally, just to finish off in terms of this particular response, you start to build in the suggestion that you could go further with actually how you're analysing the text. I mean, with this particular focus on Jack's understanding through this particular verb ought, and the implied nature of we know who should speak now, it suggests a pragmatic quality to what's actually developing within the group in terms of roles, and at this stage we really, as the reader, see that Jack is the figurehead of the group. He is the one that actually holds all of the power, and it's quite destructive in terms of how we then view Ralph and what's left for Piggy. So in terms of actually taking this response further, there is opportunity across the whole thing to develop it in another draft. Now, when we're looking at this as a class, response, one of the things that I want my students to really build on is the fact of consistency and how that really relates to the mark scheme. If you're not consistently referring to the text to support your points, if you're not developing the analysis through reference to structure and form, then you are limiting yourself in terms of the mark scheme and the criteria and the phrasing of that criteria. So what we start with is this idea of a limited response where there are gaps and holes in your analysis, and we want to build that so that it's supported more. So we develop it into what's called a clear response, where we have less gaps and actually more is said that connects to the question in particular. And then ultimately, when we're looking to really develop this to a strong, solid wall of analysis, that's when we focus on including everything we can, and we really develop the focus of the response in this way, so that routinely students are able to actually respond as successfully as they possibly can. And then obviously we want students to practice this, so the idea of typing responses and then magpieing ideas from different responses is important. So I generally focus on a few options on character responses and a few options on themes, and obviously there'll be a crossover between all of the questions, but the idea is that if students start to respond to these on computer and then start to develop pre-prepared responses to structure, form and context in particular, then they're able to actually start to shape their responses quickly and precisely once they've got a good firm understanding of the knowledge that they want to present the examiners with. And then to support this, we also have a range of focuses on flashcards for quotes, flashcards for themes, and coupling those together so that habitually students are getting into this way of responding and interleaving ideas about the text and making it fresh and current for their revision.